The winter of 1887 came early to Montana. Snow fell in thick curtains across Thorns Peak, burying the valley in silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Ezra Thorne stood on the second-floor balcony of his manor house, watching the white expanse below, his hands gripping the iron railing hard enough to hurt. The woman would arrive tomorrow, the third woman in 7 years. He closed his eyes against the memory that always came with the snow. The image of Catherine lying at the bottom of the main staircase, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her hand still reaching towards something he would never know. The servants had found her at dawn. Ezra had been in town, settling a dispute over mining claims. He had come home to find his first wife already cold. Then Margaret. Sweet Margaret with her Boston accent and her fearless laugh. Margaret who had loved him despite the whispers, despite the rumors that followed him like shadows. Margaret who had drowned herself in the creek behind the property on a spring morning when the ice was just beginning to thaw. At least that was what the town doctor had written in his report. Heart failure brought on by the shock of cold water. Ezra had not believed it then. He did not believe it now. But he had no proof, no evidence. Only the gnawing certainty that something was wrong, that someone had taken from him twice, and that the pattern was not finished. So when the letter came from Boston, from the Ashford family, he had written back with a proposal that made his conscience burn. He would take their fourth daughter, the strange one, the one they wanted gone, and he would use her as bait. If someone was killing the women who came to Thorns Peak, they would try again, and this time Ezra would be ready. He opened his eyes and stared out at the falling snow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound was lonely and hollow, like the call of something that had lost its pack. "Forgive me," Ezra whispered to the wind, to the memory of Margaret, to the woman who would arrive tomorrow and did not know she was walking into a trap. The snow continued to fall. The world continued its terrible, beautiful turning. And Ezra Thorne waited like a man condemned for the third woman to step into his cursed house. 3,000 miles away, in a different kind of cold. Eleanor Ashford sat in her father's study and listened to the man she had once trusted destroy what was left of her life. "The arrangement is made," Senator Harrison Ashford said, not looking at his daughter as he spoke. He kept his eyes on the papers spread across his mahogany desk, documents of trade and property and political maneuvering that mattered more to him than flesh and blood. "You will leave on Monday. The train departs at 8 in the morning." Nora said nothing. She sat perfectly still in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. Inside, however, her heart was a wild thing beating against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. She had known this was coming. For weeks she had felt it building the way she felt all things before they happened. The tightening in her chest when her father's business partners visited late at night. The sick twist in her stomach when she walked past her mother's sitting room and heard the whispered conversations that stopped the moment she appeared. The prickling sensation at the back of her neck that meant danger was circling closer. Nora had always been different. Even as a child she had known things she should not know. She could walk into a room and feel the emotions that lingered there like perfume. She could touch an object and sense the hands that had held it before the intentions behind the touch. Her mother had called it hysteria. Her father had called it attention-seeking. Her sisters had called it witchcraft, half joking, half serious. But Margaret had understood. Margaret, 5 years older, had been the only one who listened when Nora spoke about the feelings, the visions, the certainty that sometimes overwhelmed her like a wave. "You see true things," Margaret had told her once, sitting beside her in the garden while the other sisters laughed at some party inside. "Do not let them convince you otherwise." Margaret had left 3 years ago, gone west to marry a man she had met through correspondence. A wealthy rancher in Montana, a man named Ezra Thorne. The family had celebrated her departure with champagne and relief. Margaret had always been too curious, too willing to ask uncomfortable questions. And then 6 months later the telegram had arrived. Margaret was dead, drowned in a creek near her new home. The body had been buried before the family could travel west. There would be no viewing, no final goodbye. Nora had not believed the story then. She did not believe it now. She had tried to investigate, tried to write letters, tried to demand answers. But her father had shut down every attempt. "Let the dead rest," he had told her, his voice hard as iron. "Your sister is gone. Accept it." But Nora could not accept it, because late at night when the house was silent, she still felt Margaret's presence, still heard her sister's voice, faint as wind through leaves, whispering a single word: "Run." Now sitting in her father's study, listening to him arrange her own departure to the same place that had killed Margaret, Nora finally understood. They were not sending her away because they pitied her. They were sending her away because they feared her. "Montana is a long way from Boston," Nora said quietly, breaking the silence. Her father glanced up, his eyes cold behind his reading glasses. "Yes, it is. You are eager to be rid of me. Do not be dramatic, Eleanor. This is a good match. Ezra Thorne is a wealthy man, respected. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. Nora leaned forward slightly. "What is it that I know, Father, that frightens you so much?" Harrison Ashford's face went perfectly blank, the mask of a career politician snapping into place. But Nora saw the flicker behind his eyes, the tell. "I do not know what you are suggesting," he said. "Yes, you do." For a moment they stared at each other across the desk. Two people bound by blood but separated by a chasm of lies and secrets and things left unsaid. Then Harrison stood. "You will leave on Monday. Pack lightly. The West is not kind to excess." He walked to the door, opened. It waited for her to leave, dismissed like a servant, like a problem solved. Nora rose slowly. She moved past her father without looking at him out into the hallway where the portraits of dead Ashfords stared down with their painted eyes. At the top of the stairs she paused. "Did you have anything to do with Margaret's death?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father did not answer. But the silence that followed was answer enough. Nora did not sleep that night. She sat by her window and watched the gaslights flicker in the street below, watched the occasional carriage pass through the November darkness. Boston at night was never truly silent. There was always movement, always noise, always the sense of 1,000 lives pressing in from all sides. Montana would be different. Montana would be empty space and cold wind and stars that stretched forever. Montana would be the place where Margaret had died, and now it would be the place where Nora went to find the truth. At 3 in the morning, she rose and dressed in her plainest gown. She wrapped a dark cloak around her shoulders and slipped out of the house through the servants' entrance. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, only a few night workers and drunks stumbling home. She walked 6 blocks to a narrow building tucked between a bookshop and a tailor. The brass plaque beside the door read, "Whitmore and Associates Legal Services." Nora knocked 3 times. A minute passed. Then the door opened, revealing a thin man in his 50s, gray hair, disheveled spectacles perched on his nose. "Miss Ashford," Gerald Whitmore said, surprise clear in his voice. "It is 3 in the morning. I know. I apologize. But I need your help." Whitmore studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." His office was cluttered with papers and law books, the desk buried under pending cases. He gestured for her to sit and took his own chair, folding his hands atop the mess. "What brings you here at this hour, Eleanor?" Nora reached into her cloak and withdrew a folded letter. She had written it earlier that evening, choosing each word with care. "I am leaving Boston on Monday," she said. "I am traveling to Montana to marry a man named Ezra Thorne." Whitmore's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Lawyers were good at reading between lines. "I see. And you wish me to draw up some sort of legal protection? A marriage contract, perhaps?" "No." Nora unfolded the letter and placed it on the desk between them. "I wish you to hold this. If I die under suspicious circumstances, you are to deliver it to the authorities. It contains everything I know about my family's business dealings, about Margaret's death, and about the man I am being sent to marry." Whitmore picked up the letter, scanned its contents. His face went very pale. "Eleanor, these are serious allegations." "I know. If you truly believe you are in danger, you should not go." "I have to go," Nora said softly. "Margaret went to Thorne's Peak and died there. I need to know why. I need to know if our father had anything to do with it." And I need to know who Ezra Thorne really is. This could be suicide, perhaps, but it might also be the only way to find justice for my sister." Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it in a locked drawer of his desk. "I will keep this safe," he said, "and I will pray that I never have cause to open it." Nora stood. "Thank you, Gerald. Eleanor?" He rose as well, his face troubled. "Be careful. Whatever you are walking into, be very, very careful." She nodded once, then turned and left the office. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first gray hint of dawn touching the edges of the buildings. Nora pulled her cloak tighter and walked back through the waking city. She had 3 days left in Boston. 3 days to memorize the face she saw in the mirror, the face of Eleanor Ashford, who had lived her entire life in this cold mansion, surrounded by people who feared what she could see. In 3 days, that woman would cease to exist, and someone new would step off a train in Montana, carrying her secrets like stones in her pockets, ready to uncover the truth about her sister's death, even if it killed her. The train journey west was 4 days of rattling track and endless landscape. Nora sat by the window and watched the world change. The crowded cities gave way to small towns, then to farmland, then to rolling plains that stretched to the horizon. The air grew colder. The trees became fewer. By the 3rd day she could see mountains in the distance, blue and white, and impossibly vast. She shared her compartment with an older couple traveling to visit their son in Denver, and a young merchant heading to California with a trunk full of fabrics. They made polite conversation. They asked about her journey. She told them she was traveling to be married, and they offered congratulations that felt hollow in her mouth. On the 2nd day, as the train stopped in Chicago to take on more passengers, a man entered her car. He was perhaps 30, with brown hair and observant eyes that swept the compartment with the careful attention of someone trained to notice details. He wore a simple brown suit and carried only a small traveling bag. He took the seat across from Nora and nodded politely. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon," she replied. "Thomas Brennan," he said, offering his hand. She shook it briefly. "Eleanor Ashford." "Traveling far, Miss Ashford. Montana, and you, the same as it happens." He settled into his seat, arranging his bag at his feet. "Business in the territory. Mining concerns." Nora nodded, returning her attention to the window. But she felt the prickle at the back of her neck, the warning sensation she had learned not to ignore. This man was lying, not about his name perhaps, but about his purpose. An hour passed. The old couple dozed. The merchant read a newspaper. Thomas Brennan stared out the opposite window, seemingly lost in thought. Then very quietly he spoke. "I knew your sister." Nora's breath stopped. She did not turn her head, did not acknowledge the words, but her hands tightened in her lap. "Margaret Ashford." Brennan continued, his voice so low only she could hear. "She married Ezra Thorne in the spring of '85. She died 6 months later." Nora finally turned to look at him. His face was serious, his eyes kind but cautious. "Who are you really?" she asked. "A private investigator. I was hired by Catherine Thorne's family. She was Ezra's first wife. She died in 1883, fell down the stairs of the manor house. Her family did not believe it was an accident." "And what did you find?" "Nothing conclusive, but enough to make me suspicious." "Then your sister died. And now?" He looked at her meaningfully. "You are traveling to become his 3rd wife." The words hung in the air between them. 3rd wife. As if she were stepping into a pattern, a story already written. "Are you warning me away?" Nora asked. "I am telling you to be careful. Ezra Thorne is either the unluckiest man in Montana, or he is something much worse." "You think he killed them?" "I think 2 women are dead, and he is the only common thread." Nora was silent, processing this. Part of her wanted to believe. It wanted a simple answer to the knot of fear and questions that had plagued her since Margaret's death. But another part, the part that saw true things, whispered that the answer was not so simple. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Brennan leaned back in his seat. "Because you deserve to know what you are walking into, and because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have a feeling you are not going to Montana just to be a bride. You are going to find answers." Nora met his eyes. "Yes?" "Then be smart about it. Do not trust easily. Do not let your guard down, and if you need help—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small card with an address in Helena, Montana. "Send word here. I will come." She took the card, tucked it into her handbag. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Do not thank me yet, Miss Ashford. Just stay alive." The train reached the station nearest to Thorns Peak on the fourth day, late in the afternoon. Snow was falling heavily, thick flakes that swirled in the wind and blurred the edges of the world. Nora stepped off the train onto a wooden platform that creaked under her feet. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The other passengers dispersed quickly, met by family, or disappearing into the small town that huddled around the station. Nora stood alone with her trunk, searching the crowd for a face she would recognize from the single photograph her father had shown her. Then she saw him. Ezra Thorne stood at the edge of the platform, tall and still as a statue. He was well over 6 feet broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy wool coat and dark trousers. His hair was black, touched with gray at the temples. And his eyes. Even from a distance, Nora could see them. Ice blue, cold as the winter sky, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to step back. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. No hurry, no warmth, just steady, inexorable approach. When he stopped in front of her, Nora had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close she could see the scar that ran down his left cheek, a thin white line that spoke of violence in his past. His face was handsome, in a harsh, weathered way, the face of a man who had spent years working under an unforgiving sun. "Miss Ashford," he said. His voice was deep, rough, from disuse or cold. "Welcome to Thorns Peak." Nora curtsied slightly, the automatic gesture of a woman raised in Boston society. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for meeting me." He nodded once, then gestured to a carriage waiting nearby, pulled by 2 large horses whose breath steamed in the frigid air. "We should go." The snow was getting worse. He lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing and carried it to the carriage. Nora followed, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. As she climbed into the carriage, she caught a glimpse of his face in profile. There was no joy there, no anticipation, just a grim set to his jaw, as if he were bracing himself for something unpleasant. The carriage lurched into motion. Nora sat across from Ezra, the space between them feeling vast despite the close quarters. The town disappeared behind them, quickly swallowed by the snow and the gathering darkness. They drove through a landscape of white hills and dark pine forests, following a road that wound upward into the mountains. For a long time neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the horses' hooves, the creak of the carriage, and the wind howling outside. Finally, Ezra broke the silence. "I hope you survive the winter," he said. Nora's head snapped up. "I beg your pardon." He was looking out the window, not at her. "The winters here are brutal. Not everyone makes it through." It was not a threat, or at least it did not sound like one, but there was something in his tone, something heavy and dark, that made the words feel like a warning. "I am stronger than I look," Nora said quietly. "You will need to be." Silence fell again. Nora studied him, trying to read the man across from her. But Ezra Thorne was closed tight as a locked box, his face revealing nothing, his eyes distant. After another hour, the carriage turned onto a private road. Trees pressed close on either side, their branches heavy with snow. Then the road opened up, and Nora saw the house. Thorns Peak Manor rose from the white landscape like something out of a dark fairy tale. It was large, 3 stories of dark wood and stone with tall windows that glowed faintly with lamplight. The architecture was severe Gothic, all sharp angles and looming presence. It did not look welcoming. It looked like a fortress or a prison. The carriage stopped in front of the main entrance. Ezra climbed out first, then offered his hand to help Nora down. She took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work. The front door opened before they reached it. An older woman stood in the threshold, thin and severe, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a black dress that made her look like a crow. "Mrs. Yates," Ezra said. "This is Miss Ashford." The housekeeper's eyes swept over Nora with cold assessment. "Welcome, miss. I have prepared the east bedroom for you." "Thank you," Nora said. Mrs. Yates turned and disappeared into the house without another word. Ezra gestured for Nora to enter. The interior was as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, heavy furniture that looked like it had been there for decades. A large staircase dominated the entryway, curving upward to the second floor. And on the wall above the first landing hung a portrait. A woman. Young, beautiful, with pale blonde hair and sad eyes. She wore a blue dress and held a single white rose. Nora stopped staring at the portrait. The woman's gaze seemed to follow her, mournful and knowing. "Catherine," Ezra said quietly from behind her. "My first wife." Nora turned to look at him. She was lovely. Yes, she was. "How did she die?" Ezra's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain or guilt or both. "She fell down those stairs," he said, pointing to the grand staircase. "Broke her neck. I was not home when it happened." The words were simple, factual, but underneath them Nora heard the weight of years of blame, of questions never answered. "I am sorry," she said. Ezra nodded once, then moved past her toward the stairs. "Mrs. Yates will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. We keep country hours here." He walked away without looking back, disappearing down a hallway that led deeper into the house. Nora stood alone in the entryway, the portrait of Catherine Thorne watching her from above, and felt the first real stab of fear. What have I walked into? The bedroom was large and cold, despite the fire burning in the hearth. Mrs. Yates had left her there with a curt instruction to ring, if she needed anything, then vanished like smoke. Nora moved through the room slowly, taking inventory. A 4-poster bed with heavy curtains, a wardrobe of dark wood, a writing desk by the window. Everything was clean but impersonal, like a room in a hotel rather than a home. She went to the window and looked out. The snow was still falling, blanketing the world in white. In the distance, she could see the dark line of a creek frozen solid. Beyond that, mountains rose like teeth against the sky. Margaret had looked out this window. Margaret had slept in this bed, walked these halls, lived in this house for 6 months before she died. Nora pressed her hand against the cold glass and closed her eyes. The familiar sensation washed over her, the prickling awareness that meant she was touching something important. She let herself sink into it, let the impressions come. Fear, terrible, crushing fear. Someone had stood at this window, heart racing, contemplating escape. Someone had pressed their hands to this glass just as Nora was doing now and wished desperately to be anywhere else. Margaret. Nora opened her eyes, breathing hard. Her sister had been afraid. Whatever had happened here, Margaret had known she was in danger. A soft knock at the door startled her. She turned as Mrs. Yates entered without waiting for permission. "Dinner is ready, miss. Mr. Thorne is waiting." Nora nodded, composing herself. "Thank you. I will be down shortly." But Mrs. Yates did not leave. She stood in the doorway, her dark eyes fixed on Nora with an expression that was difficult to read. "You are the third?" the housekeeper said quietly. "I beg your pardon. The third young woman to come here. To this room." Mrs. Yates stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The first fell. The second drowned herself in the creek. Nora's blood went cold. "Why are you telling me this? Because you should know. Because you should be careful. Because." The old woman paused, her face unreadable. "This house does not let people go easily." Then she turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. Nora stood frozen, her mind racing. The third wife, the third woman, the third piece in a pattern she did not yet understand. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Dinner could wait. Nora crossed to the wardrobe and began unpacking her trunk, searching for the item she had hidden at the bottom beneath her clothes. Her fingers closed around a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph of Margaret taken a year before she had left for Montana. Her sister smiled at the camera, young and hopeful and alive. "What happened to you?" Nora whispered to the image. "What did they do to you?" The photograph offered no answers, but Nora knew there had to be something here, some clue, some piece of evidence that would explain Margaret's death. She just had to find it before whoever had killed her sister came for her, too. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. Nora and Ezra sat at opposite ends of a long table in a dining room lit by candelabra. Mrs. Yates served the meal without comment. Roast beef, potatoes, bread. Simple, well-prepared, tasteless in Nora's mouth. Ezra ate methodically, his eyes distant. He did not attempt conversation. Neither did Nora. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, as Mrs. Yates cleared the plates, Nora spoke. "May I ask you something, Mr. Thorne?" He looked up, his ice-blue eyes focusing on her. "Of course." "Why did you send for me, specifically? My father has 4 daughters. I am neither the eldest nor the prettiest. Why me?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his napkin and leaned back in his chair. "Your father's letter said you were the most sensible of his daughters, that you did not care for society nonsense, that you could manage a household and did not require constant entertainment." He paused. "I need a wife who can survive here, not a decoration." It was a practical answer, a reasonable answer, but Nora heard the lie underneath it, the thing he was not saying. "I see," she said softly. "Do you—" Their eyes met across the table. For a moment, Nora felt the full weight of his gaze, the intelligence behind it, the calculation. This was not a simple man. This was someone playing a game she did not yet understand. "I think," Nora said carefully, "that you are not telling me the whole truth." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of Ezra's mouth. Almost, but not quite. "Truth is a luxury, Miss Ashford. Out here, survival matters more." He stood, effectively ending the conversation. "I have work to attend to. Mrs. Yates will show you to the library if you wish to read. Otherwise, you are free to retire." He left the dining room without another word. Nora sat alone at the long table, the candles burning low, and felt the walls of the house pressing in around her. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. The cold house, the silent husband, the housekeeper with her dire warnings. And underneath it all, the ghost of Margaret, her fear still lingering in the air like perfume. Nora rose and left the dining room, but instead of going upstairs to her bedroom, she began to explore. The house was a maze of hallways and closed doors. Some rooms were clearly in use. Others looked like they had been shut up for years. Nora moved quietly, listening for footsteps, for voices. But the house was silent, except for the creak of old wood and the whisper of wind outside. On the second floor, she found a door that was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the gap. Nora hesitated, then pushed it open. It was a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large desk sat beneath a window. Papers were scattered across the surface, documents and letters and ledgers. And on the wall behind the desk, another portrait. Not Catherine this time, but a different woman. Dark hair, warm brown eyes, a smile that lit up her whole face. Margaret. Nora's breath caught. She stepped into the room, drawn to the portrait as if by invisible strings. Her sister looked so alive and the painting so real that Nora almost expected her to speak. "You should not be in here." Nora spun around. Ezra stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I was just looking," Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is my private study. That is my sister." The words hung in the air between them. Ezra's expression did not change, but Nora saw his hands tighten into fists at his sides. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." "You knew her?" "Yes." "You married her." Ezra stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion, held barely in check. "Margaret was my second wife. She came here 2 years ago. She was remarkable, brave, kind, curious about everything." He paused, staring at the portrait. "She died 6 months after we married, drowned in the creek." Nora's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You loved her?" "Yes." "And now you have sent for her sister." Ezra finally looked at her, really looked at her, and Nora saw something in his eyes that made her breath stop. Not love, not desire, but a desperate, terrible determination. "I did not know you were her sister until you arrived," he said. "Your father's letter never mentioned it. He only gave your name, Eleanor." "But you knew there was a connection," Nora said, understanding dawning cold and clear. "You looked into my family. You must have." "Yes." "Why?" Ezra crossed to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I think someone killed Margaret, and I think they killed Catherine before her. And I think if I bring another woman here, if I set the trap again, they will come out of hiding." The room seemed to tilt. Nora grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "You brought me here as bait," she said. "Yes." "You knew I might die." "Yes." "And you did it anyway." Ezra turned to face her, his expression hard as stone. "I did it because I need to know the truth, because 2 women I cared about are dead, and I cannot rest until I know who killed them. Because," his voice cracked just slightly, "because I owe them justice even if it costs me my soul." Nora stared at him, her mind reeling. This was not the story she had expected, not the simple villain, not the grieving widower, but something far more complicated and far more dangerous. "What if I refuse?" she asked. "What if I leave tomorrow, go back to Boston? Then you will never know what happened to Margaret, and whoever killed her will remain free." He was right. Nora knew he was right. She had come here for answers, had walked into this trap with her eyes open. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing Ezra admit that he had used her, that he was willing to risk her life for the truth, made it real in a way it had not been before. "I could have you arrested," she said quietly. "You could try, but we are a long way from Boston Miss Ashford, and I have friends in the territory." They stared at each other across the study, 2 people locked in a battle of wills and secrets. Then Nora made her decision. She crossed to the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, among the papers and pens, she saw a small velvet box. She opened it. A necklace, silver delicate with a single pearl pendant. And engraved on the back of the pendant, in tiny letters, was a name. Margaret. Nora's vision blurred with tears. She had given this necklace to her sister on her 18th birthday. Margaret had worn it every day, never took it off. And now it was here in Ezra Thorne's desk in this house where her sister had died. "She drowned," Nora said, her voice shaking. "But she was wearing this when they found her." "Yes." "My sister would never have gone into that creek willingly. She was terrified of deep water, had been since we were children." Nora looked up at Ezra, tears streaming down her face. "Someone put her in that water. Someone killed her and made it look like suicide." Ezra's jaw tightened. "I know." "Then we find them," Nora said, her voice hardening. "We find whoever did this, and we make them pay. Even if it means risking your own life." Nora closed her hand around the necklace, feeling the cool metal against her palm, the weight of her sister's memory. "Especially then," she said, "because Margaret would have done the same for me." Ezra studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a sharp movement of his head. "Tomorrow we start looking, but tonight." He moved to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. "Lock your bedroom door, Miss Ashford, and do not open it for anyone, not even me." "Why?" He turned back, and in the lamplight, Nora saw fear in his eyes. Real, honest fear. "Because if someone killed twice before, they will not hesitate to kill again, and if they know you are asking questions." He left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Nora stood alone in the study, holding her sister's necklace, surrounded by the ghosts of the dead. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow fell thick and fast, burying the world in white. And somewhere in this house, someone who had killed before was waiting, watching, planning their next move. Nora fastened the necklace around her throat. The pearl rested cold against her skin, a reminder of what she had lost and what she had yet to find. She would not run. She would not hide. She would find the truth no matter the cost, even if it killed her. The morning after their confrontation in Ezra's study, Nora woke to find the house transformed. Sunlight streamed through her window, catching on the frost that had formed overnight on the glass, turning each crystal into a tiny prism. For the first time since arriving at Thorne's Peak, she felt something other than fear or determination. She felt curious. Downstairs, she found Ezra already at breakfast, reading through a stack of papers. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, an understanding. They were partners now, bound by a shared purpose that neither could walk away from. "Good morning," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "Good morning." Nora filled her plate from the sideboard and sat across from him. "What are those mine reports, shipment records? I am going through everything James has given me over the past year, looking for inconsistencies." Ezra rubbed his eyes, and Nora realized he probably had not slept. So far everything appears legitimate, but Margaret would not have been concerned if there was nothing to find. "May I help?" Ezra studied her for a moment, then pushed half the stack across the table. Look for anything that does not make sense. Duplicate entries, numbers that do not add up, missing documentation. They worked together in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of paper. Mrs. Yates came and went, clearing dishes, her face as expressionless as always. But Nora caught the housekeeper watching them, once or twice, her dark eyes unreadable. After an hour, Nora set down a ledger. Ezra, this shipment here. It says 500 pounds of ore sent to the smelter in Butte on March 15th, but the payment received is listed as 600 pounds worth. Ezra leaned across the table to look. His finger traced the entries. That could be a clerical error, or the smelter could have estimated wrong initially and paid the difference later. Except there is no notation explaining it. And look! Nora flipped back several pages. The same thing happened in January and December. Small differences, but consistent. Always in our favor. Always. Ezra sat back, his expression thoughtful. That is odd. James is meticulous about record-keeping. He would not make the same mistake repeatedly. Unless it is not a mistake. Their eyes met. Nora saw understanding dawn in Ezra's face, followed quickly by resistance. James Hartwick had been his partner for 7 years, his friend. The idea that he might be stealing, might be the reason 2 women were dead, was almost too much to accept. "We need more than this," Ezra said quietly. "We need proof he is doing it deliberately. We need to understand why. Then we keep looking." They spent the rest of the morning buried in paperwork. By noon they had found a dozen more small discrepancies. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could not be explained away. But together they formed a pattern. "He is clever," Nora said, stretching to ease the ache in her back. "Taking small amounts that might never be noticed, building his theft slowly over years." If that is what he is doing. Ezra still sounded reluctant to believe it. "I need to see the mine's records. The original documentation, not just what James provides me." "Then we go to the mine." "Not we. Me. If James suspects we are investigating, it could be dangerous." Nora stood planting her hands on the table. "We agreed to work together. That means I go where you go. Besides, if Margaret discovered this, then it is not too dangerous for me to look into it. It is simply the risk we must take." Ezra rose as well, his height forcing Nora to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. For a moment she thought he would argue, then his mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are stubborn. I am thorough. There is a difference." "Very well, we go tomorrow, but you stay close to me. You do not ask questions where James can hear. You simply observe." "Agreed." The tension between them shifted, becoming something warmer. Ezra's hand lifted as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. The moment stretched fragile as the ice on the windows. Then Mrs. Yates entered to announce lunch, and the spell broke. That afternoon, Nora explored the house more thoroughly. She walked through rooms that had been closed up, ran her fingers along dusty furniture, looked at portraits of people long dead. The house was beautiful in its way despite the darkness. It had good bones. It wanted to be a home again. In one of the unused bedrooms on the 3rd floor she found a trunk pushed into a corner. The lock was broken. Inside were women's clothes, old-fashioned but well-made. And at the bottom, wrapped in silk, was a wedding dress. Catherine's, she realized. Ezra's first wife. Nora lifted it carefully. The fabric was cream-colored, delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was beautiful and sad. The dress of a woman who had believed in happy endings. I should have gotten rid of that years ago. Nora turned to find Ezra in the doorway, his expression pained. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "Catherine wore it when we married. She was so happy that day, so full of hope." He stepped into the room, looking at the dress but seeing something else. "I failed her. I was not here when she needed me. I was too focused on the mine, on building something that would last. And she died alone. You cannot blame yourself for an accident." "Can I not? If I had been here, if I had paid more attention to my wife instead of my business, she might still be alive." Ezra's voice was rough with old guilt. "And Margaret, I made the same mistake with her, so consumed with finding out what happened to Catherine that I did not protect Margaret when she needed me." Nora set down the dress and crossed to him. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, holding tight. "You are protecting me now," she said quietly. "You are trying to make sure what happened to them does not happen to me. That matters, Ezra. That counts for something. Does it? Or am I just using you to ease my conscience?" "You are using me to find the truth. There is a difference." Nora squeezed his hand. "And I am using you for the same purpose. We are using each other. That makes us equal." Ezra looked down at their joined hands. "I do not deserve your understanding." "Perhaps not. But you have it anyway." They stood like that, hands clasped, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. Then Ezra gently pulled away and left the room. Nora watched him go, feeling the weight of his grief, the burden he carried. She understood now why he had brought her here, not just for justice, but for absolution. He needed to know that Catherine's and Margaret's deaths were not his fault, that he could not have prevented them, and she needed him to be right. Because if Ezra was responsible even unknowingly, then there was no justice to be found here, only tragedy. That evening they ate dinner in near silence. Mrs. Yates served the meal with her usual efficiency, then disappeared into the kitchen. Alone at the long table, Nora and Ezra picked at their food, both lost in thought. "Tell me about the mine," Nora said finally. "How it started. Why it matters to you." Ezra set down his fork. "When I came west, I had nothing. No money, no prospects. Just the willingness to work harder than anyone else. I staked a claim on land everyone said was worthless. Spent 2 years breaking my back, digging through rock, finding nothing. But you kept going. I had nothing to go back to. So yes, I kept going. And one day I found silver. Not much at first, just enough to know it was there. I needed money to expand, to hire men, to buy equipment. That is when James came along. He had the capital you needed. He had money and business sense. I had the claim and the knowledge of how to work it. We became partners, and for 7 years it worked. The mine prospered. We both became wealthy. I trusted him completely." Nora heard the past tense. Trusted. Not trust anymore. "When did that change?" "The night I realized I had brought you here under false pretenses. The night I understood that if someone killed Catherine and Margaret, they might kill you too. And I would be responsible." Ezra's ice-blue eyes met hers. "That night I stopped trusting anyone, including myself. You can trust me. Can I? You are here because your family sent you away. You are investigating your sister's death. You have every reason to hate me for using you." "I do not hate you, Ezra. I understand you. There is a difference." They finished the meal in silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not uncomfortable, but contemplative. The silence of two people beginning to understand each other. After dinner, Ezra invited Nora to the library. It was a room she had not yet explored, lined floor to ceiling with books. A fire burned in the hearth, and 2 chairs sat before it, angled toward each other. "Margaret loved this room," Ezra said, running his hand along the spines of the books. "She would sit here for hours reading everything she could find. History, philosophy, even mining engineering texts. She wanted to understand the world. She sounds remarkable." She was. Fearless and curious and kind. When she looked at you, you felt seen. Truly seen, not just observed. He pulled a book from the shelf, opened it to reveal an inscription. She wrote in all her favorites, little notes, observations, arguments with the author. Nora took the book. Margaret's handwriting was neat and firm. In the margin of a page about mineral deposits, she had written, "But what about the human cost? Who pays when we tear up the earth?" She cared about more than profit, Nora said softly. "Yes, she cared about the workers, their families. She wanted me to build housing, a school. She had plans for this whole valleyways to make it better for everyone." Ezra's voice cracked slightly. "I wish I had listened to her more, taken her ideas seriously instead of dismissing them as impractical." "It is not too late. You could still do those things. If I survive this, if we find the truth and I am not arrested or killed." He took the book back and replaced it on the shelf. "But yes, if I live through this, I will build everything she wanted. I will make her vision real." They sat in the chairs before the fire. The flames danced and crackled, throwing warm light across the room. Outside, wind howled around the house, but inside there was peace. "Ezra," Nora said after a long silence, "why did you really choose me, not the story you told, the real reason?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he turned to look at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Because when I saw Margaret's diary, when I read about a sister named Eleanor who saw things others did not, who spoke truth even when it was dangerous, I thought perhaps you could see what I could not, find what I had missed." He paused. "And because I was so desperate for answers that I was willing to risk another woman's life to get them. That is the truth, Nora. That is who I am. Someone who makes hard choices. Someone who uses people. We all use people, Ezra. The question is whether we admit it." Nora leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "You admitted it to me. You gave me the choice to leave. That matters." "Does it?" "Yes." They sat in the firelight, not speaking, just being. And slowly Nora felt something shift between them. Not trust exactly, not yet, but the possibility of trust, the foundation on which it might be built. At some point, the fire burned low. Ezra rose to add more wood, his movements economical and practiced. When he sat back down, he was closer than before, close enough that Nora could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I am afraid," he said quietly, "afraid that we will not find the truth in time. Afraid that whoever killed them will kill you too. Afraid that I will fail again." "Then we will be afraid together," Nora replied. "But we will not let fear stop us." Ezra's hand reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek so gently she almost did not feel it. "You are braver than you know. So are you." They sat like that, his hand on her face, her eyes locked with his, as the fire burned and the wind howled and the night deepened around them. It was not a kiss, not yet. But it was something. A moment of connection that neither of them had expected. A moment of hope. Finally, Ezra pulled back. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow we go to the mine." "What about you?" "I will be here a while longer. Thinking." Nora stood reluctantly. "Good night, Ezra." "Good night, Nora." She left him there, silhouetted against the dying fire, and climbed the stairs to her room. But she did not sleep for a long time. She lay in bed thinking about the man downstairs, about the grief he carried, about the way his hand had felt against her face. This was becoming more complicated than she had anticipated. She had come here for Margaret, for justice, for answers. She had not expected to start caring about Ezra Thorne. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Nora dressed warmly and met Ezra at breakfast. They ate quickly, neither speaking much, both focused on the task ahead. The ride to the mine took them through landscape transformed by winter. Snow covered everything, pristine and beautiful. The mountains rose sharp and white against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "It is beautiful here," Nora said. Yes, Margaret thought so too. She used to ride out here just to watch the sunrise. Ezra's voice was soft with memory. She said the mountains made her feel small in a good way. Like her problems did not matter as much when she remembered how vast the world was. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. When they finally reached the mine, Nora was struck by how different it looked than she had imagined. Not a dark, dangerous hole in the ground, but a complex operation. Buildings, equipment, men moving with purpose. Ezra helped her dismount and led her toward the largest structure. "The office is in here. James keeps all the records." "Will he be here?" "Probably, but we have a right to review the books. I am the majority partner." They entered the building. Inside it was warmer, heated by a large stove. A clerk looked up from his desk, surprise crossing his face. "Mr. Thorne, we were not expecting you." "Is James here?" "In his office, sir." "Good, we need to speak with him." The clerk hurried to announce them. A moment later, James Hartwick appeared in the doorway, his smile easy and welcoming. "Ezra, Miss Ashford, what brings you out here on such a cold day?" "I want to review the mine records," Ezra said bluntly. "The originals, not the summaries you send to the house." Something flickered across Hartwick's face, too quick to identify. Then the smile returned. "Of course, though I am curious what prompted this sudden interest in the details. I am considering expanding operations. I want to make sure our current processes are as efficient as possible." It was a smooth lie delivered with perfect calm. Hartwick studied Ezra for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I will have the ledgers brought out, though I warn you they are quite detailed. It may take some time to review them all." We have time. Hartwick gestured to a table. Please sit. I will have coffee brought as well. He disappeared into the back. Nora leaned close to Ezra. He suspects something. Perhaps, but he cannot refuse without raising more suspicion. Ezra's hand found hers under the table, squeezed briefly. Stay alert. The ledgers arrived, carried by two clerks. They were massive volumes, each containing months of entries. Ezra opened the first one and began scanning the pages. Nora watched over his shoulder, looking for the same discrepancies they had found in the records at the house. It did not take long to spot them, small differences in weights, payments that did not quite match shipments. Nothing dramatic, but consistent. Here, she whispered, pointing to an entry. And here, the same pattern. Ezra nodded grimly. He made notes on a separate piece of paper, carefully recording each discrepancy. After an hour they had found dozens. Hartwick returned carrying coffee himself. Finding everything in order, I hope? Mostly, Ezra said neutrally, though there are some questions I will need to discuss with you later. Of course, I am always happy to clarify anything. Hartwick set down the coffee and lingered. Miss Ashford, how are you finding life at Thorns Peak? I imagine it is quite different from Boston. Very different, Nora said carefully, but beautiful in its own way. Ezra is lucky to have found you. After losing 2 wives, I imagine he despaired of ever finding happiness again. The words were sympathetic, but Nora heard the edge beneath them. The reminder that 2 women had died, the implication that she might be next. I am sure those were tragic accidents, Nora said. Of course, though one does wonder at such consistent misfortune. Hartwick's eyes met hers, and Nora saw calculation there, assessment. But I am sure you are much more careful than they were, much more aware of the dangers. I try to be. Good. It would be terrible if history repeated itself. Hartwick smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well, I will leave you to your work. Let me know if you need anything. He left, and Nora let out a breath she had not known she was holding. He knows, she whispered. Yes, he knows we are investigating. The question is what he will do about it. They continued reviewing the records, but the atmosphere had changed. Nora felt watched, assessed. Several times she caught Hartwick's clerk glancing their way, his expression worried. By late afternoon they had seen enough. Ezra closed the last ledger and stood. Thank you for your cooperation, James. This has been very informative. Hartwick appeared from his office. Find what you were looking for. Yes and no, we will need to discuss some of these entries in detail. Perhaps you could come to dinner tomorrow night. It was a test, an invitation that could not be refused without seeming suspicious. I would be delighted, Hartwick said smoothly. They rode back to Thorns Peak in silence, both processing what they had learned. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and cold. We have proof of the theft now, Nora said finally. The discrepancies are too consistent to be mistakes. We have evidence of discrepancies. We do not have proof James is responsible. He could claim the clerks made errors, or that the smelters were dishonest. Ezra's jaw was tight. We need more. Margaret's diary might have more details, if we can find it. That night, Nora searched her room thoroughly. She checked behind every piece of furniture under the floorboards inside the wardrobe. Margaret had written in the diary right up until her death. It had to be somewhere. She was about to give up when her hand brushed against something loose in the back of the wardrobe, a panel that moved when pushed. Behind it was a hollow space, and in that space was a leather-bound book. Nora's hands trembled as she pulled it out. Margaret's diary. She opened it carefully, reverently. Her sister's handwriting filled the pages neat and firm. Dated entries going back 2 years. Nora wanted to read every word to hear Margaret's voice again through the pages. But she forced herself to skip to the end, to the final entries, to the days before her sister died. I am certain now, James is stealing from the mine. I have proof, real proof. But when I tried to tell Ezra James was there, he must have overheard because he came to my room afterward. Nora's blood ran cold as she read on. He did not threaten me directly, but the implication was clear. If I tell Ezra what I know, I will regret it. He reminded me of how Catherine died, how easily accidents happen in a place like this. The next entry was dated the day before Margaret died. I am afraid. I know too much, and James knows I know. But I cannot stay silent. I cannot let him continue to steal, to threaten. Tomorrow I will tell Ezra everything. I will show him the proof I have gathered. And then we will go to the authorities together. James Hartwick will face justice for what he has done. The final entry was brief, written in a shaking hand. He knows I am going to tell. Mrs. Yates brought my tea tonight, and I saw something in her eyes. Warning, pity, I do not know. I am going to lock my door and wait for morning. Wait for Ezra to return from town. Then I will tell him everything. I just need to survive until morning. But Margaret had not survived. The diary ended there. Nora sat on the floor, the book in her lap, and wept. For her sister who had been so brave. For the justice that had been denied. For the years of lies and silence. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Nora, are you all right?" Ezra's voice, concerned. She opened the door, her face wet with tears, the diary in her hands. I found it. I found Margaret's diary." Ezra stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Nora handed him the book, and he read the final entries, his face going pale. "She knew," he whispered. "She was going to tell me, and they killed her before she could." "Not they, James." And Mrs. Yates helped him. Ezra's hand tightened on the diary. "I trusted her. Mrs. Yates has worked in this house for years. I never suspected." "Why would you—" "She is just a housekeeper." Nora wiped her eyes. "But that is why she is perfect. She has access to everything. She can poison food, stage accidents. And no one suspects the help. We need to confront them." "No, not yet. If we accuse them without proof, they will disappear, or worse, they will kill us too." Nora took the diary back. "We need a plan. We need to catch them in the act." "How?" "We make them think I am a threat, that I know what Margaret knew, that I am going to tell the authorities." Nora's mind was racing, the plan forming even as she spoke. "We make them come after me, and when they do, we will be ready." Ezra grabbed her shoulders. "Absolutely not. I will not use you as bait again. It is too dangerous." "You already used me as bait. That is why I am here. This is just the next step." "Nora, please." She looked up at him, saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. Not for himself, but for her. "This is the only way," she said softly. "You know it is." For a long moment Ezra said nothing. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. Nora could hear his heart pounding, feel the tension in his body. "I cannot lose you too," he whispered into her hair. "I cannot. You will not. We will do this carefully. Together." Nora pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Do you trust me?" "Yes, God help me, yes." "Then trust me now. Trust that we can do this." Ezra's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the last of her tears. "You are the bravest person I have ever met." "I am terrified." "That is what makes you brave. Doing it anyway." They stood like that, holding each other in the quiet room, gathering strength for what was to come. And then slowly Ezra lowered his head. The kiss was gentle at first, a question. Nora answered by rising on her toes, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate. Two people seeking comfort, connection, hope in the darkness. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the night we met in the study," Ezra admitted. "I have wanted you to," Nora replied. They smiled at each other, fragile and real. Then Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow we spring the trap. But tonight—" He paused. "Tonight, can we pretend there is no danger? No murder, no conspiracy, just us?" "Yes, tonight, just us." They sat together on the floor, backs against the bed, shoulders touching. Ezra held Margaret's diary, and together they read through it from the beginning, learning about the woman who had brought them together, the woman whose death would finally be avenged. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, by the warmth of the fire, two people found something neither had expected: each other. And the strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring. 3 days after finding Margaret's diary, Nora and Ezra sat in his study late into the night, plotting their trap. The ledger Nora had discovered behind the loose floorboard lay on the desk between them, damning evidence of years of theft. But evidence alone was not enough. "James will claim the books are forgeries," Ezra said, his finger tracing the columns of falsified numbers. He has lawyers' connections. Without a confession, without catching him in the act, a good attorney could create reasonable doubt. Nora leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her bones. They had been over this a dozen times, circling the same problem. How to force James Hartwick to reveal himself, to make a mistake that could not be explained away. "We need him to think he has won," she said slowly. "We need him to believe he is safe, that I am just another foolish woman who discovered too much." Ezra's eyes sharpened. "What are you proposing?" "I let him know I found the ledger, but I make him think I do not understand what it means, that I need his help to interpret it." Nora sat forward. "I go to him as a confused bride worried about my future husband's finances. I make myself vulnerable." "Absolutely not." Ezra's voice was flat final. "I will not use you as bait again. It is too dangerous." "You already used me as bait," Nora reminded him gently. "That is why I am here. And it worked. We found the truth about Margaret. Now we need to finish what we started." They stared at each other across the desk. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "If something happens to you," Ezra said quietly, "I will never forgive myself. Then make sure nothing happens to me." Nora reached across the desk and took his hand. "We do this together. You watch my back. I will watch yours." Ezra's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded once, a sharp movement of acceptance. "We do it my way," he said. "Carefully. With precautions." Agreed. They spent the next hour planning every detail. The story Nora would tell. The signals she would use if she felt threatened. The places Ezra would hide, always close enough to intervene. As midnight approached, Ezra stood and moved to the window. Snow was falling again, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in white. "There is something else we need to consider," he said, without turning around. "Mrs. Yates?" Nora had been thinking the same thing. The housekeeper's behavior over the past days had been strange. Too quiet. Too watchful. Several times Nora had caught the woman staring at her with an expression that was hard to read. "You think she is involved? I think she knows more than she is saying. She was here when Catherine died. She was here when Margaret died. She has been in this house watching everything for 7 years." Ezra turned to face her. If James has an accomplice, it would be her. The thought made Nora's skin crawl. She had been living under the same roof as a potential murderer, eating food the woman prepared, sleeping while she moved through the halls. "What do we do about her?" "We watch her as carefully as we watch James. And we make sure she does not have access to your food or drink without me present." "You think she would poison me?" "I think she would do whatever is necessary to protect her employer, or her son." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Son. Was it possible that Mrs. Yates and James Hartwick were related? It would explain the loyalty, the willingness to commit murder. "We need to know for sure," Nora said. "Before we spring the trap, we need to know who all the players are." Ezra nodded. "I will make inquiries. Quietly. There are records, birth certificates. If there is a connection, I will find it." They parted for the night shortly after, each retreating to their separate rooms. But Nora found sleep impossible. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, going over the plan again and again, looking for flaws, for dangers they had not anticipated. At some point in the dark hours before dawn, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful. Someone moving through the house who did not want to be heard. Nora rose silently and went to her door, pressing her ear against the wood. The footsteps paused outside her room. She held her breath, her heart hammering. Then they moved on, fading down the hall toward the stairs. Nora waited 5 minutes, then eased her door open and looked out. The hallway was empty, lit only by moonlight filtering through the windows. But she could see wet footprints on the wooden floor, snow melting into dark patches. Someone had come in from outside. She followed the trail downstairs, moving as quietly as she could. The footprints led to the kitchen, where a lamp burned low. Nora peered around the doorframe. Mrs. Yates stood at the table, her back to the door. She was doing something with her hands, some task that required concentration. Nora shifted slightly to get a better view. The housekeeper was preparing tea. 2 cups. She poured hot water from the kettle, added tea leaves. Then she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a small vial. Nora's breath stopped. Mrs. Yates uncorked the vial and tipped a few drops of clear liquid into one of the teacups. Then she stirred it carefully, replaced the cork, and tucked the vial back into her pocket. Poison. She was preparing poisoned tea. Nora backed away slowly, her mind racing. She needed to get to Ezra, needed to warn him. But before she could move, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. She tried to scream, tried to struggle, but the grip was iron strong. She was dragged backward, away from the kitchen, into the dark sitting room. "Do not make a sound," Ezra's voice whispered in her ear. Nora went limp with relief. He released her, and she spun to face him. He was fully dressed, despite the hour, his face grim in the darkness. "You saw," she breathed. "I have been watching her for 2 nights. She prepares the tea around this time, then takes it upstairs. I think she has been drugging you, Nora. Small doses, not enough to kill, but enough to make you confused, disoriented. Why, to make you easier to manipulate, or to set the stage for an accident." Ezra's hands settled on her shoulders. "This confirms it. She is working with James. We need to move up our timeline." "How soon?" "Tomorrow. We do this tomorrow." The next morning, Nora played her part perfectly. At breakfast, she appeared distracted, troubled. She picked at her food, barely eating. When Mrs. Yates brought her tea, Nora made a show of drinking it, though Ezra had already switched the cups when the housekeeper was not looking. After the meal, Nora retreated to the sitting room with the ledger, making sure to leave the door open where she could be observed. She pored over the numbers, her brow furrowed, occasionally making small sounds of confusion. "Mrs. Yates passed by several times, her eyes tracking to the ledger each time. Finally, Nora stood and went to find Ezra. She found him in the stable checking on the horses. She made sure her voice carried, made sure anyone listening could hear. "Ezra, I need to speak with you about something I found." He turned, playing his part as well. "What is it?" "These books, these accounts from the mine. Some of the numbers do not make sense to me. I thought perhaps Mr. Hartwick could explain them." "He manages the mine, does he not?" Something flickered in Ezra's expression. Annoyance. Dismissal. "James is busy with important work. He does not have time to explain business matters to you." Nora let her face fall, let hurt show in her eyes. "I only thought if we are to be married, I should understand our finances." "You should focus on managing the household, not concerning yourself with things beyond your understanding." Ezra's tone was cold-cutting. It was an act, but the words still stung. "Of course," Nora said quietly. "Forgive me for overstepping." She turned and walked away. Her shoulders slumped. Behind her, she heard Ezra return to his work. To anyone watching, it would seem like a wife chastised, put in her place. Perfect. That afternoon, Nora bundled herself in her warmest cloak and walked into town. It was 3 miles along the snow-packed road, but she needed to be seen making the journey alone. Needed to appear isolated, abandoned by her husband. The town was small, just a collection of buildings clustered around a main street. Nora went to the general store and made small purchases, chatting with the shopkeeper about the weather, about settling into her new home. She mentioned casually that she was hoping to see Mr. Hartwick, that she had some questions about the mine operations. "He is usually at his office this time of day," the shopkeeper said helpfully. "Just down the street above the bank." Nora thanked him and walked to the indicated building. She climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor and knocked on a door marked with Hartwick's name. "Come in," his voice called. She entered to find James Hartwick seated behind a desk, papers spread before him. He looked up, and surprise crossed his features, followed quickly by pleasure. "Miss Ashford, what a delightful surprise." He stood and came around the desk, taking her hand. "Is everything all right? You look troubled." "I hope I am not disturbing you," Nora said, letting uncertainty color her voice. "I did not know where else to turn." "Not at all. Please sit." He guided her to a chair, his hand lingering on her arm longer than necessary. "Tell me what is troubling you." Nora withdrew the ledger from her bag, the false one that Ezra had prepared. It looked nearly identical to the real one, but the numbers had been altered, made more obvious, easier to notice. "I found this among Ezra's papers," she said. "I was trying to understand our finances, but some of these entries do not make sense. Ezra became quite angry when I asked him about it. He said I should not concern myself with business matters." Hartwick took the ledger, his expression carefully neutral as he scanned the pages. But Nora saw his eyes sharpen, saw the quick calculation behind his friendly facade. I see, he said slowly. And you thought I might help you understand these entries? You manage the mine operations. I thought perhaps you could explain why there are two different amounts listed for the same shipments. May I keep this for a day or two? I would need to compare it with my own records to give you accurate information. Of course. Nora stood wrapping her cloak around herself. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Hartwick. Ezra has been so distant lately. I feel quite alone here. You are not alone, Miss Ashford. Hartwick's smile was warm, sympathetic. If you ever need anything at all, you need only ask. You are very kind. Nora left his office and walked back toward Thorn's Peak, knowing that Hartwick's eyes followed her from the window. She had planted the seed. Now they would see what grew from it. That night Ezra staged their argument. They waited until after dinner, until they knew Mrs. Yates would be in the kitchen cleaning up. Then Ezra raised his voice loud enough to carry through the house. You had no right to take those papers to James. I was only trying to understand, Nora shot back, matching his volume. You refuse to explain anything to me. Because it is not your concern. You are here to be my wife, not my business partner. Perhaps I was wrong to come here at all. The sound of breaking glass, a plate Ezra had swept from the table. Then leave. I did not force you to come. Silence. Heavy and loaded. Then Nora's voice, quieter but still audible. Perhaps I will. Footsteps as she ran upstairs. The slam of a door. Ezra counted to 30, then followed his own footsteps, heavy and angry sounding. He went to Nora's room, and they waited listening. It did not take long. Within minutes they heard movement in the hallway. Mrs. Yates, her steps quick and purposeful, heading down the back stairs toward the servants' quarters. She is going to send word to James, Ezra whispered, telling him about our fight. Good. Nora's hand found his in the darkness. Now we wait. They did not have to wait long. An hour later, one of the ranch hands knocked on Ezra's study door with a message. Mr. Hartwick requested a meeting, urgent business regarding the mine. Could Mr. Thorne come to the office in town tomorrow morning? Ezra sent back word that he would be there. After the hand left, Ezra turned to Nora. This is it. Tomorrow James will make his move. He thinks we are fighting, that you are vulnerable, that you have shown him evidence of the embezzlement. He will want to secure that ledger. Make sure you do not show it to anyone else. What do you think he will do? I think he will try to convince me to get rid of you, or he will offer to handle the problem himself. Ezra's face was grim. Either way, we will have him. And Mrs. Yates, I have arranged for Thomas Brennan to watch the house tomorrow while I am gone. If she tries anything, he will stop her. The private investigator had arrived in town 2 days earlier, responding to a telegram Ezra had sent. He had been gathering evidence, talking to people who might have seen something the nights Catherine and Margaret died. I do not like you being here alone with her, Ezra said. I will not be alone. Mr. Brennan will be watching, and I can take care of myself. Ezra studied her face in the lamplight. Then he reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin. When this is over, he said quietly, when James and Mrs. Yates are in custody and justice is done, I want to start again with you, properly. No lies, no danger, just us. Nora's breath caught. Ezra. I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But these past weeks, working with you, watching you face danger with such courage. He paused. You have given me something I thought I lost when Margaret died. Hope. Nora turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss to his calloused hand. I feel it too, this connection between us. Then promise me you will be careful tomorrow. Promise me you will survive this. I promise. If you promise the same. Deal. They stood close in the quiet study, the fire burning low, the house settling around them. Tomorrow would bring danger confrontation, the culmination of all their planning. But tonight there was only this moment, this fragile hope growing between two damaged people. Ezra leaned down slowly, giving Nora time to pull away. She did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and searching, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. I should go, Nora whispered. Before I forget, we have a plan tomorrow. Yes? But Ezra did not release her. Nora, if anything goes wrong, if you feel threatened at all, you run. Do you understand? You do not try to be brave. You just run. The same goes for you. I mean it. So do I. They smiled at each other, a moment of levity in the dark. Then Nora slipped from his arms and left the study, climbing the stairs to her room. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart still racing. Tomorrow. Tomorrow they would end this, or tomorrow would end them. Ezra left for town at first light, riding out on his big bay horse. Nora watched from her window as he disappeared down the road, then turned her attention to preparing for what would come. Thomas Brennan was somewhere on the property, hidden, but watching. That knowledge gave her comfort, but not enough to quiet the fear coiling in her stomach. She dressed in her simplest gown, dark blue wool, that would not show dirt or blood. The thought made her shiver. She was planning for violence now, expecting it. At mid-morning, Mrs. Yates brought tea to the sitting room where Nora had positioned herself with a book. The housekeeper's face was expressionless as always, but Nora sensed anticipation in the way she moved, the way her eyes tracked every gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Yates," Nora said, not touching the tea. "Will there be anything else, miss?" "No, that will be all." The housekeeper left, but Nora knew she was not far. She could feel the woman's presence in the house like a weight oppressive and watching. An hour passed, then another. Nora kept to the sitting room, reading the same page over and over, her mind too scattered to comprehend the words. Then she heard it, the sound of a horse approaching. Not Ezra's heavy hoofbeats, but something lighter, faster. James Hartwick had come. Nora set down her book and stood smoothing her skirts. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her hands were steady. She heard the front door open, heard Mrs. Yates greeting someone, heard footsteps approaching. James appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, his smile warm and concerned. "Miss Ashford, I heard about your disagreement with Ezra. I came to see if you were all right." "That is very kind of you, Mr. Hartwick, but I am fine, truly." "May I sit? I would like to discuss the ledger you showed me." "Of course." He settled into the chair across from her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. "I have been reviewing those numbers you were concerned about. I'm afraid there are some serious discrepancies." "Discrepancies." "Ezra has been moving money in ways that are questionable. I think he may be preparing to disappear Miss Ashford, to take the money from the mine and leave this territory." Nora let shock register on her face. "That cannot be true." "I am afraid it is. And if he does, he will leave you with nothing? No home, no income, no future." Hartwick leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I want to help you, Eleanor. May I call you Eleanor? I suppose. I can protect you from what Ezra is planning, but I need your help. I need you to sign some papers transferring ownership of the mine to my name temporarily, just until we can sort out this mess." There it was, the real play. Hartwick was not here to kill her. He was here to steal everything, to use her to legitimize his theft. "I do not know," Nora said hesitantly. "Perhaps I should speak to Ezra first." "There is no time. He could leave at any moment." Hartwick withdrew papers from his jacket. "Just sign these, and I promise everything will be fine. I will take care of you." Nora reached for the papers, let her hand tremble slightly. "You swear this is the right thing to do?" "I swear it." She took the papers, pretending to read them. They were transfer documents beautifully forged that would give Hartwick complete control of the mine and all its assets. All they needed was her signature as Ezra's intended wife. "I am frightened," Nora whispered. "I know, but you can trust me." Hartwick offered her a pen. "Sign, and I will make sure you are protected." Nora took the pen. Her hand moved toward the paper, then she set it down. "No," she said clearly. Hartwick's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon." "No, I will not sign." Nora stood, putting distance between them. "These papers are false. You are trying to steal from Ezra, using me as your tool." For a moment, Hartwick's mask slipped. Nora saw fury flash across his features, cold and vicious. Then he smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "You are smarter than the others," he said softly. "Margaret figured it out too late. Catherine never understood at all. But you knew from the beginning, did you not?" "I suspected." "And still you came here, still you let yourself be used as bait." Hartwick stood slowly. "That was very foolish, Eleanor." "Was it? Did you really think I would not know, that I would not see through your little performance with Ezra?" He moved toward her, predatory and dangerous. "I have been playing this game for 7 years. You are a child compared to me. Perhaps, but I am not alone." "No. You have your investigator watching the house. Mister Brennan, is it? He is currently unconscious in the barn. Mother is quite skilled with a blackjack." Fear spiked through Nora, but she kept her face calm. "Ezra will be back soon. Ezra is not meeting me in town. He is meeting 3 men I hired who will make sure he has a fatal accident on the ride home." Hartwick smiled. "By tonight you will both be dead and everything will belong to me." "You cannot kill us both and expect people to believe it was an accident." "Of course not. You will kill Ezra. You will shoot him when he returns distraught over his plans to abandon you. Then, overcome with guilt, you will take your own life." Hartwick withdrew a pistol from his jacket. "The gun is registered in your name. I made sure of that weeks ago. The story is perfect." Nora backed toward the door, but Mrs. Yates appeared in the doorway, blocking her escape. The housekeeper's face was no longer expressionless. It was cold, with purpose. "I am sorry, miss," Mrs. Yates said, "but my son's future is more important than your life." "Your son?" Nora looked between them. "So it is true. You are his mother." "Did you think I worked here out of loyalty to Ezra?" "I came to help James, to make sure his plan succeeded." Mrs. Yates pulled a length of rope from her apron. "Now you will sit in that chair and wait quietly for your future husband to return, and then we will end this." Nora had one chance, one desperate gamble. She closed her eyes and let her ability, the sight she had always tried to hide, open fully. Images flooded her mind. Margaret in this very room, struggling against Mrs. Yates. Catherine at the top of the stairs, Mrs. Yates's hands on her back. And something else, something buried beneath the old chapel behind the house. Her eyes flew open. "Margaret hid more evidence," she said quickly. "More proof of your theft. She buried it under the chapel. If you kill me without finding it, someone else will." Hartwick's eyes narrowed. "You are lying." "Am I? Ask your mother. Ask her if Margaret went to the chapel the day before she died." Mrs. Yates's face paled slightly. "She did. I saw her there with a spade. But I thought—" "You thought she was gardening." Nora pressed her advantage. "She was burying evidence. A second ledger. Letters to the authorities. Everything she found. If you do not get it before killing me, it will be found. And you will hang." Hartwick and his mother exchanged glances. Nora saw doubt flicker between them. "Take her to the chapel," Hartwick said finally. "We will dig it up, make sure. Then we finish this." Mrs. Yates grabbed Nora's arm roughly. "If you are lying, girl, you will regret it." They marched her outside into the cold. The chapel was a small stone building at the edge of the property, old and unused. Snow had drifted against its walls, making the door difficult to open. Inside it was dark and freezing. Hartwick lit a lamp, while Mrs. Yates kept her pistol trained on Nora. "Where?" Hartwick demanded. "Under the altar. She told me in a letter before she died." Nora was making it up as she went, praying her instinct was right, praying there was actually something there. Hartwick began pulling up the old floorboards near the altar. Mrs. Yates watched him, her gun never wavering from Nora. And then Ezra's voice rang out from the doorway. "Step away from her! Now!" Everyone froze. Ezra stood in the entrance, his own gun drawn, his face like thunder. Behind him, Thomas Brennan appeared very much conscious, also armed. "You are supposed to be dead," Hartwick said, shock clear in his voice. "Your hired men were not very good at their jobs. Mr. Brennan's friends were better." Ezra moved into the chapel, his gun trained on Hartwick. "Now drop your weapons, both of you." "You cannot prove anything," Hartwick said, but his voice shook. "I have the ledger. I have Margaret's diary. I have testimony from 3 workers you paid to falsify shipment records." Ezra's voice was cold as death. "And now I have you caught in the act of attempting to murder my intended wife. That seems like enough." For a moment no one moved. Then Mrs. Yates swung her gun toward Ezra. Nora did not think. She launched herself at the older woman, tackling her to the ground. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small space. Nora felt the bullet pass close to her head, felt Mrs. Yates struggling beneath her. Then strong hands pulled her up and away. Ezra had crossed the room in 3 strides, helping her, while Brennan kept his gun on Hartwick. "Are you hurt?" Ezra's hands ran over her, frantically checking for injuries. "I am fine. "I am fine." Mrs. Yates lay on the floor disarmed and gasping. Hartwick had frozen his hands raised in surrender. "It is over," Ezra said. "James Hartwick, Helen Yates, you are both under arrest for the murders of Catherine Thorne and Margaret Ashford." Brennan moved forward with rope to bind them. As he did, Nora noticed something. Under the floorboards Hartwick had torn up, there was a metal box. "Wait," she said. She knelt and pulled it free. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was another ledger and a stack of letters. Margaret's handwriting covered the pages. "She really did hide evidence," Nora breathed. "My God, she really did." Ezra knelt beside her, looking at the documents. His face went pale, then hard with fury. "This is everything. Every theft, every falsified record, and letters. Margaret wrote letters to the territorial governor, to the mining commission, to a lawyer in Helena. She documented everything. She was going to bring him down." "So they killed her," Nora finished softly. Ezra's hand found hers, squeezed tight. Around them Brennan was securing the prisoners. Outside, Nora heard more horses approaching, the marshal and his deputies arriving right on schedule. It was truly over now. The truth had come to light. Justice would be done. But as Nora looked at the evidence in her hands, at the proof of her sister's courage and her killer's cruelty, she felt no triumph, only exhaustion and grief, and relief that she had survived what Margaret had not. The trial took place 6 weeks later in Helena, the territorial capital. The courthouse was packed with spectators, journalists, curious onlookers, drawn by the scandalous story of murder and embezzlement in the Montana mountains. Nora sat in the witness stand, her hands folded in her lap, and told the truth. All of it. How she had come to Thorns Peak to investigate her sister's death. How she and Ezra had worked together to uncover the conspiracy. How Hartwick and his mother had tried to kill them both. Across the courtroom, James Hartwick sat beside his attorney, his face carefully blank. But when Nora described finding Margaret's hidden evidence, she saw him flinch. Mrs. Yates showed no emotion at all. She sat silent and still, as expressionless as she had been when serving tea in Ezra's house. The prosecution presented the ledgers, the diary, the letters. They called witnesses, mine workers who had been paid to falsify records, the doctor who had been bribed to sign false death certificates, people who had seen Mrs. Yates near the stairs the night Catherine died. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts, both of them. When the verdict was read, Nora felt Ezra's hand find hers. She held tight, feeling the weight of the past weeks, the fear and danger and grief finally beginning to lift. Sentencing came swiftly. James Hartwick was sentenced to hang. Mrs. Yates, as his accomplice, received the same. As they were led from the courtroom in chains, Mrs. Yates finally turned to look at Nora. Their eyes met across the crowded room. The housekeeper's face was still expressionless, but in her eyes Nora saw something that might have been respect, or possibly hatred. It was hard to tell. Then they were gone, taken to the territorial prison to await execution. Nora and Ezra walked out of the courthouse into bright April sunlight. The snow had finally melted, revealing green grass and the first brave wildflowers pushing up through the earth. Spring had come to Montana at last. A figure was waiting on the courthouse steps, a man in his 50s, well-dressed, his face carefully neutral, Nora's father. "Eleanor," Senator Harrison Ashford said. She had known he would come. Had known he would want to control the narrative to protect the family name from scandal. "Father?" They looked at each other. Ezra's hand tightened on Nora's, offering support. "I have spoken with the journalists," Harrison said quietly. "I have convinced most of them to keep the family name out of their reports. The story will be about the murders and the mine, not about the Ashford family." "How generous of you. I also brought this." He withdrew an envelope from his jacket. "It is a bank draft, enough money to ensure you never need worry about finances. Consider it compensation for everything." Nora stared at the envelope. Blood money. Payment to keep her quiet about the family's secrets about her father's role in sending her away. "I do not want your money," she said quietly. "Eleanor, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I am being honest. You sent me away because I knew too much about your business dealings. You sent me to a place where 2 women had already died, and you did not care if I died too. You cared more about your secrets than your daughter's life." Harrison's face tightened. "That is not true." "Is it not? Then why are you here with money instead of an apology? Why are you trying to buy my silence instead of simply being my father?" For a moment, Harrison Ashford had no answer. Then his politician's mask slipped back into place. "I came to help you," he said stiffly. "I do not need your help. Not anymore." Nora turned away from him, from the money, from the family she had left behind. "I have everything I need." She walked down the steps with Ezra beside her. Behind them, her father stood alone, still holding the envelope no one wanted. "Are you all right?" Ezra asked quietly. "Yes, I think. For the first time in my life, I really am." They rode back to Thorns Peak together, the journey taking 2 days through country transformed by spring. The ice had broken on the creeks. Birds sang in the trees. The world felt new, washed clean. When they finally crested the hill that looked down on the ranch, Nora saw that changes had been made in her absence. The old chapel had been torn down. In its place was a garden already planted with early flowers. "I had it done while we were in Helena," Ezra said. "I thought we needed something beautiful in that place, something to honor what Margaret did there. It is perfect." They rode down to the house. Workers called greetings. Dogs ran out to meet them. It felt like coming home. That evening, they stood together at Margaret's grave behind the house. Someone had placed fresh flowers there, delicate purple blooms that swayed in the breeze. "I could not save her," Ezra said quietly, "but we made sure her death meant something. We made sure justice was done. She would be proud of you, of us." Nora laid her own flowers beside the others. "Rest now, sister. Your fight is over." They stood in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Behind them, the house waited warm and welcoming. Finally, Ezra turned to face Nora. He took both her hands in his. "I asked you to wait until this was over," he said, "until justice was done and we could start fresh. Well, it is over now. It is. Eleanor Ashford, will you marry me? Not because of an arrangement, not because of a plan, but because I love you. Because you are brave and true and you make me believe in tomorrow again." Nora's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes, God, yes, Ezra, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the last light faded from the sky. They had survived. They had won. And now, finally, they could begin to live. They were married a month later in the small church in town. There were no guests from Boston, no family representatives. But the church was full anyway, packed with ranch workers and townspeople and friends who had come to celebrate. Nora wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Ezra wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the whole church erupted in cheers. At the reception afterward, Thomas Brennan raised a glass in toast. "To the bravest woman I have ever met," he said, looking at Nora, "and to the man smart enough to recognize her worth, may your lives together be long and happy." Everyone drank. Music played. People danced. Late in the evening, Nora found herself on the porch looking out at the darkening mountains. Ezra came to stand beside her, his arm settling around her waist. "Tired?" he asked. "A little. Happy, though." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "I have something to show you." He led her away from the party through the garden to a spot overlooking the valley. There, carved into a large stone, were 3 names: Catherine Thorne, beloved wife, Margaret Ashford Thorne, brave soul. And below them room for more names, for the family that would come, for the future they would build. "I had it made," Ezra said quietly, "to remember, to honor, to make sure we never forget what was lost and what we fought for." Nora leaned against him, her hand resting on her stomach where new life had just begun to grow. She had not told him yet. There would be time for that. Time for everything now. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood together as stars emerged in the darkening sky, as the party continued in the distance, as the world turned toward tomorrow. Eleanor Ashford had come to Montana as bait, as a trap, as a woman no one wanted. But Eleanor Thorne stood here now as a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had found her place in the world. And she had never been happier. The winter was over, spring had come, and with it, hope for all the seasons yet to follow. the end.